This is the Construction Leading Edge podcast from constructionleadingedge.com and constructionbusinessaccelerator.com. My name is Todd DeWalt, and it's my job to help you, the construction business owner and leader, maximize profits and eliminate chaos in your business. I've got a great interview with you today. This is one I've been looking forward to for a long time. It is with Larry Harrington. He is a retired U.S. Army general. He spent time in Afghanistan working with the 101st Airborne and the 82nd Airborne in the War on Terror. He was also involved with rebuilding the Gulf Coast in the Mississippi area after Hurricane Katrina. He is now the CEO of a federal contractor, and here's what you're going to get out of this. You're going to hear how military leadership transcends from military applications into business, and specifically the construction business. We're going to talk about what disappointed Larry the most when he transitioned from military into the construction industry. He'll explain what it means to say, when it comes to planning, your enemy always has a vote. You'll learn about the problems with hiring friends and family, what it means to turn skills into habits. Larry has 3 questions that somebody on your team or your project needs to be asking every day. And then Larry will talk about the 4 E's, which are very profound, 4 E's, and what it means about your ability to tolerate ambiguity and paradox. And then we'll also talk about some leadership lessons from his time in Afghanistan. This is a great one. I met Larry in person at one of my events in October of 2019, and here we are. We recorded this in May 2020, and I've been looking forward to this one. So, as I mentioned during this interview at some point, if you want to hear more about Larry's experience and learn more from his experience and what he knows about business, what he knows about leadership, then send me an email. Let me know that you want to hear some more. Larry and I have discussed some more podcast episodes, maybe even something a little bit more involved. But you're going to enjoy this interview. You're going to want to listen to this one a couple of times, probably. But before we get into that interview, I do have a couple of resources that I want to get in front of you. As a contractor, you manage a ton of jobs every day, and trying to keep up to speed and ensure that work actually gets done takes up way too much time. And that's where Company Cam comes in. Every photo and video your guys take at a job is automatically organized by location and instantly synced from the field to wherever you are. Now you'll know exactly what's happening across your company, be able to communicate more effectively, and cover your butt from future claims. Document your jobs, communicate with your crews, and protect your company, all with Company Cam, the only app every contractor needs. Company Cam is now totally free for small teams. Sign up is quick and easy, and there's no credit card required. Discover which plan fits your needs and get your company started at companycam.com/CLE. If you manage a project or a crew on a construction site, you know how important timely, clear communication is to keep your team safe and keep your projects on track. Over the years, many have turned to text messaging as a way to communicate with their teams and their subs. It gets information across quickly, and it's easy to use because everyone knows how to text. But these messages aren't stored in one place, and they're hard to manage and stay on top of. And because messages and pictures aren't saved, they're not organized, and they're not searchable, it makes it almost impossible to refer back to those conversations later in the event of a dispute. Well, there's good news, though. I recently discovered an app called Field Chat. Field Chat is a messaging app purpose-built for construction teams. It alleviates what I like to call the Bermuda Triangle of information between the field, the office, and the client. With Field Chat, all of your conversations on a job site happen in one place. Project managers can organize foremen, superintendents, and subcontractors by channels and start messaging using the mobile app or text. It also integrates with text messaging, so it's easy to include anyone in a conversation, whether it's someone on your own team that refuses to learn technology or a trade partner or a sub that just prefers to keep text messaging rather than downloading something new. Where was Field Chat when I ran my construction business? I needed a tool like this to keep our operations running smoothly. instead of all the fragmented conversations that left important people out and commitments that were made that I could no longer find proof of. Here's what this tool means to you: more time, better documentation, less mistakes, and simplified dispute resolution. Field Chat is offering you, the Construction Leading Edge podcast listener, 15% off your subscription. Just go to fieldchat.com/edge. You can start your free trial right now and see how it feels to have communications that free up more of your time. Go to fieldchat.com/edge. Okay, here we go. Without further ado, here is my conversation with retired General Larry Harrington. Enjoy. I am here with Larry Harrington, and he's got a fascinating story. This is going to be a great interview. So, Larry, thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule to be on the podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. How are you doing, Todd?
Excellent. So we met briefly at one of my events in Kentucky back in October of 2019, and we've talked a few times since then. And I'm glad that it finally worked out that we could get you on the podcast. So you have a unique background. You're a construction business owner. You spent a lot of time in the military, and we're going to cover some of the leadership principles that transcend from the military into business, some misconceptions about military leadership. Hopefully get into some good stories, I think. But give folks a brief background. If, I don't know, looking at your bio, I don't know how you can make that brief with everything that you've done in your career, but give folks a little bit of background about where you spent most of your career and what you're up to now.
Wow. I started out in the mid 80s or early 80s, actually. Graduated at the University of Southern Mississippi with a degree in architectural engineering and construction. I was there on an athletic scholarship where I played football and baseball for the university. Was involved with ROTC. This was right at the end of the Vietnam War, so mid-70s, late 70s, and was commissioned as an officer in the United States Army and was deployed overseas immediately with 8th Infantry Division, 12th Engineers in Dexheim, Germany. So I spent almost almost 4 years actually in Europe with the follow-on assignments with 46 engineers with Aviation Brigade in Fort Rucker, Alabama. I was in and out of Kansas for a series of schoolings and also as an instructor for ROTC, which I took a position at the university in the ROTC department, where I left what was called active duty and went on full-time guard with the Mississippi Army National Guard, where I was a facilities manager, director of public works at Camp Shelby, Mississippi. During that time, I was also commanded the 150th Engineers out of Meridian, took them to the National Training Center in NTC in California, one of the first guard units to go there, and the unit was very successful. So was kind of a pioneer in transitioning the traditional guard units into our modern Army to where we fight and fall in formations with active duty and reserve. So it was a thrill to be leader of those great soldiers that made that happen. During that tenure, I also finished a master's degree, an MBA from William Carey University, and a master's in strategic studies from the U.S. Army War College. Hurricane Katrina hit about 12 years ago now, I guess, and I took a task force in, about a 4,000-man task force. Task Force Storm, actually, was the name, and commanded that task force and kind of setting the conditions for the rebuild. We stabilized the Mississippi Gulf Coast through all those 4 counties on the Gulf Coast, and then all the way up to I-20, halfway up through the state. So stabilized and set conditions for the rebuild, which there was quite a bit of devastation, as you remember, from that storm. So very proud of those soldiers and the way they did. We did a lot of great things there. One of the proudest moments, I guess, I had 480 something soldiers whose homes were either destroyed completely or destroyed to the point that they required some sort of attention. But they were in formation the next morning, ready to go and help individuals, other than themselves. So it speaks highly of our volunteer force in the Army, and it was a real, it's an honor for me to lead those great soldiers from about 27 different states, by the way, that came that formed our unit. I was ready to retire, but the Army called and said, "Hey, we're promoting you to Brigadier General. The packet's headed to the White House for signature. Congratulations. And oh, by the way, you headed to Afghanistan." So at the time, I had actually retired full-time guard and gone to work with Yates Construction in Mississippi and throughout the Southeast. Had quite an ambitious agenda with them. I was the head of their government services division, and we did work for the State Department and along the 35 corridor out in Texas, where we built everything from border stations to barracks to you name it. We were involved with commissaries. So called back to active duty, left Yates, went almost 2 years back on active duty, where I commanded a task force in Afghanistan in support of Operations OEF. And part of the 101st Airborne Division initially. They ripped about halfway through the tour. It was a little over a year tour, and then the 82nd Airborne, so we supported the 82nd Airborne. My primary mission was to counter IED fight. We ran patrols, found 65% of all the IEDs placed in the country at the time. We also had where we built COPS and FOB, which COPS are command outposts and forward operating bases. We built heliports, landing strips for fixed-wing aircraft. And we had a demining mission where we cleaned up mines left behind from the Russians, and then also had a humanitarian mission. We built some bridges, we did a lot of different things on it. And also ran a trade school trying to educate some Afghans to actually incorporate them in our civilian workforce at the installation. So quite a robust effort there for a year and a half or so. Came back and retired 10 years ago, actually. Let's see, this is May, this month, 10 years ago. Retired as Assistant Adjutant General for the state of Mississippi, where I opened a business with a group of Turkish gentlemen. Circa is their company name, global company out of Turkey. I met them in Afghanistan. We're looking for stories here. So they were going into a particularly hot area in Afghanistan, and I nixed the mission, wouldn't let them go in. Bottom line, it saved about 30 of their personnel. The base was hit the next morning, was overrun, and they would have probably been killed or captured. So they never forgot that. They came to me at the end of my tenure in the military and said, "We want you to join our organization." I said, at my age, the only way I'd do that is if I had a controlling share. So I owned 51% of a company called ICS Circa. And ICS Circa, we serviced work for primarily the State Department, the Corps of Engineers, and we also did some oil and gas work out in the Dakotas back during the oil boom before it went bust. So that's where I've gotten to where I am now. The Turks and ICS Circa, we're regenerating some of that. It's kind of, my partners wanted to retire, semi-retired 3 years ago. I left it dormant. We are cranking it back up. But Transfer Fed is my flagship company. It's a service-disabled, veteran-owned company. We specialize in, we've laid out this broad commercial front that includes everything from manufacturing to industrial types of work particularly along the Mississippi River between Baton Rouge and New Orleans. We've got an office in Gonzales. We do the old bricks and mortar construction where we hard bid work for the U.S. government. The examples being we're building an armory right now for the reserves. We're doing work for the FBI at their compound in Huntsville. We've worked at Tyndall Air Base, Keesler Air Base, and the Navy bases along the Gulf Coast. So pretty robust, but our core competency is government work, and particularly that very deliberate, concentrated type of work that you have to be able to do for the government. So TransferFed is, it's a company, my flagship company, and I'm also a serial entrepreneur, so I'm involved with several other things as opportunities provide. Is that a pretty good overview for you?
That's a really good overview. Some people are probably thinking, this guy has a different idea of retirement than I do. Sounds like you tried to retire once and you ended up in active duty and retired again and started up multiple businesses. So, you obviously have a lot going on.
Well, my mantra is I might have to die, but I don't have to retire, Todd. So I look at it as a series of retirements. I do something.
So, brief sidebar. When some people think about retirement as like the end, the destination after 40, 50 years of work, they can finally just hang it up and go on to something else. What do you think about that whole concept of retirement?
Well, I go back to something we'll talk about in a minute. When I mention energy and the spiritual energy you have to have, my Christian background is that I believe that God gives us all a gift. And what we're to do is explore, expand, and, not only capitalize, but make that gift the best that we can personally make it. I don't think that's singular. I think that sometimes we're multi-talented, and God gives us many gifts. And I've been blessed to be able to have the creative mind and to have some of these gifts that I hope that I've taken to the best I personally can make it. And then I've been able to go on and do other things that perhaps I have a skill at doing. So I don't look at it as retirement of the end. I look at more as a transition into something else that the Lord's given you the talent to do, and I hope I've been doing that.
Yeah, interesting. I like that approach. So let's talk about a topic that I'm pretty fascinated by, which is how military leadership transcends into specifically construction business and construction leadership. I've interviewed Chris Fussell, who is the co-author of the book Team of Teams, who co-authored that book with the retired General Stanley McChrystal. Pretty fascinating book about the war on terror in Afghanistan and Iraq and some of the lessons there. Also love to talk about and teach content from Jocko Willink and Leif Babin from their books, Team of Teams, not Team of Teams, Extreme Ownership, and now The Dichotomy of Leadership. Fascinating stuff. It was really impactful for me, but I'd like to talk about how, obviously, you've transitioned from military leadership into business. I'll just throw it out this way. How does military leadership transcend into leading a construction business?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think it kind of parlays quite well, actually. And maybe this concept's a little not politically correct in today's time, but listen, the construction business is still a very high testosterone, occupation, just like the military and just like my athletic background. It's about competition. It's about winning and losing and knowing how to win and lose gracefully in the right way, because we're not going to win all the time. So I think that it requires a separate or a certain type of leadership skill. And it can be passive aggressive. It can be aggressive. You got to know when and where to apply those. But it's very much understanding one of my 4 E's, which I'm sure we'll get to in a minute, but that of excellence, understanding where the goal line is in athletics and how you get there through the first down markers or where first base is and how you set the conditions for base runners to hit a home run or a grand slam. Those things are incorporated in the construction industry. It's a very finite goal that we're looking for, and how we move through the space, time, and distance to get there has to be very calculated. It has to be process oriented to overcome the chaos, because even the best of plans, just like in combat, the enemy has a vote. Well, in the construction industry, there's a lot of other votes out there, to include weather, to include owners, to include materials, to include subs, to include all these things, that you have to have a leadership style that's flexible and adjustable and thinking on your feet, the communication skills that are required to get everybody motivated, motivating people to accomplish something that they may not necessarily want to do, which is one of the tangents of military leadership. You know, military leadership, first of all, we believe is taught. You're not born with the leadership like maybe some countries believe that you have a king and so forth, and it's a bloodline deal, and that's what entitles them to a leadership position. The military, particularly the U.S. military, believes that it's learned skills and that it can be taught. And there's certain tenets of that, and you could do a whole show on that itself. But a lot of those tenets are similar to the construction business. In wartime, a leader has to motivate usually highly motivated people to become motivated to each other as a group, as a team, as you were talking about, to get motivated as this group so that they can do things collectively and individually that they may not want to do themselves. And wartime is, convincing people to be in harm's way, to be around gunfire and all the dangers that can take your life. Well, there's a semblance of that in construction too. It's a dangerous business. And if you don't pay attention, you're not concentrated, and if you're not using the skill sets and understand those skill sets, you're not communicating that everybody around you is dependent upon you. You know, the old saying in the military, I got your six, you got my six. All those sort of things can be, and I identify with in the construction industry, just like I did in the military and also as I did in athletics.
So let me ask you this. When you transitioned from the military into the construction business, what's one thing that you were surprised or disappointed about in the construction industry from a leadership standpoint?
I think the biggest disappointment and the lessons I've learned is just the business sense of things, is that in this business we're in, a lot of times people, in the military, when somebody comes in uniform and you see U.S. Army, U.S. Air Force, Navy, or whatever in their last name, you kind of know what they're about. You look at their rank and you understand basically what their standards are, what their values are, which are across the board. In this industry, it's not so. We're so litigated that people take advantage of contracts. There's no more handshake, we're going to get it done sort of thing. So the biggest disappointment for me is that this world of construction is run by insurance companies, banks, and lawyers, if you want to know the truth. So we work for them. And to have that on your side, to have the proper team of those three, I call it the Diablo trifecta. If you have those on your team, you got a chance to get through it, because the biggest disappointment I have, people just don't pay their bills. It's amazing to me how difficult and how much energy and time we spend collecting money in this business.
Yeah, that's good. You mentioned that a big part of military leadership is getting people motivated to operate collectively. What's one key that you found for getting people motivated to do something that may not be in their best interest or may even put them in harm's way?
Well, one of the greatest rewards in life is to be a part of something, in my opinion now, to be a part of something larger than yourself. Newt Rockney talked about it. Different coaches talk about it. Military leaders talk about it. And I have, in my age, I've talked to people that didn't go in the military. did not go in the military, and I ask them, or they'll comment to me, "Man, I wish I would have gone in the military," because I think as human beings, particularly people that have a sense of achievement, want to be a part of something larger than themselves. They want to be a part of a winning team. They want to be a part of something that creates something. You know, what's the use of building something if the individual doesn't grow himself in that building process? And people want to be a part of that. I believe. I'm looking for people that want to be a part of something larger than themselves and want to coach and mentor and help people around them so that collectively they can tell their kids and grandkids one day that they did this project or they did this or they did that. It's important to them. Some people, that's not important. It's just a paycheck and a job. They usually don't fit real well in our organization over a long period of time.
So how do we take that principle, that human tendency to want to be part of something bigger than ourselves and be part of a team? How do we use that to solve some of the problems in the construction industry?
Well, I think you have to look at it in the micro and the macro. It's easier at the smaller level with small groups. Where it becomes difficult when you deal with large organizations. I found in the military that my personality, people knew it was my unit till I got to be about brigade level. After that, I had staffs of 200 people. So my personal values, my signature of they knew that was Harrington's unit because of the way they talked, the way they acted, the way they did. Diminished at the higher organization. So you fall back on processes and standard operating procedures and policies and those sort of things that collectively as an executive, you pull your staff members in and you write and you put and you concentrate on those policies and procedures so that those policies and procedures, when tied with the schedule, when tied with submittals and so forth, and then the execution, where those three spheres of influence, where they cross in the middle, become habits. And those habits is what you differentiate, in my opinion, in this business. It's the habits of an organization, whether it's invoicing properly or whether it's cleaning up a job site properly, whether it's the material usage, where it's the values of the individuals that are working. Do they wear their PPE when you're not looking? Do they take the safety issues that are at hand seriously? Those are the sort of things that you influence at the smaller levels. I don't know if that answered your question, but refresh me on exactly the point you're looking.
No, that definitely touched on it. That addressed it at the macro level, and I want to come back to habits in a minute. But let's say you're talking to small business owner, somebody who has 5, 10, 15 employees, and they want their people, they get excited thinking about, yeah, I want to be part of something bigger than myself. And I want to create this thing that will attract the right people, to attract the people who aren't just looking for a paycheck, people that want to take ownership and they want to be engaged in what they're doing. What can that small business owner do to attract that right kind of person? Maybe the question is, what do you do to attract that kind of person, or alternatively to repel the wrong kind of person?
And I wish I told you I had a formula for it, but I think we're driven. This is a cash flow business. You're driven by money. So, we have a tendency to start out and say, I'm going to hire friends and family because I can trust them. They've got my values. Just to find out very shortly, they don't have some of the skill sets that requires you to move on and keep moving in this industry. So then you go out and you hire somebody that you think has the skill sets to make it for you to the next level, just to find out they don't have the values. So when you hit a stride is when you're able to identify those individuals that share the same value system as you as an individual and your group collectively, but also bring the skill sets to differentiate from competitors in the business.
Gotcha. So let's talk about, excuse me. You talk about turning skills into habits. What does that mean? You touched on that briefly, but what does it mean to turn skills into habits?
Yeah. From a big perspective, you'll hear me talk about it, and my employees are tired of me talking about it a lot of times. But anyway, um, I get on to them all the time about understanding where you are. People go through life, and I know this is very philosophical. Maybe we can drill down in the weeds with a follow-on podcast one day. But philosophically, I think people think that their time is past or their time's ahead of them, and they fail to understand the now. They don't understand that your moment is now. So I try to get my employees to understand that we have got to develop through a series of processes and procedures certain habits that daily we don't have to think about anymore. It's not a concerted effort or requires a lot of concentration, because in the construction business, I think there's three spheres of influence. And if you drew three circles intersecting in the middle, that little area in the middle right there, let me talk about the three spheres of influence first. And the questions that have to be asked every day. I ask people in my organization, or certain people in my organization, to ask, what if? The what if question needs to be asked every day. What if? It may be, what if we do this? Or what if we had that equipment? Or what if we use these supplies? And then I have a certain staff group, and you could call it, this is strategic, operational, and field level. And all of them cross back and forth through that. But I have a group of people that ask, what is? They're the ones that define things like submittals and invoices and all that. That's the what is. That's what kind of sets the conditions, you may say. Going back to the what if, that's my scheduler. That's whether they're using Timberline, P through 12, whatever, Those are the guys that are setting the conditions through a series of scheduling. And then the last question is, I'm sorry, the second question is what's next? Okay, those are the folks that do all your invoicing and your submittals, run your APs, run your ARs, do your balance, all that. They tell you kind of, what's next, what you can anticipate. And then the what is. The what is the execution. That's at the job site, and that's giving you the real world feedback that you need. And it creates an energy. If these questions are asked, there's momentum that's built. And this momentum propels you into the future, so that if you got a target, say if it's a job, if you ask these questions and you're working with those spheres of influence, it generates irreversible momentum, and it creates mass. And that mass tells you how many people need to be involved with the organization. You can set milestones up with decision points. You can do all these things that I used in the military as we, set a campaign together and try to get people motivated. And as we move through actual real-time environment and, kind of movement to contact, you may say, we had decision points along the ways. In construction, it may be a critical path method or whatever that we were checking on a daily basis, and the individuals involved were all in line with it, and they were all flexible enough to adapt, as long as we had azimuth scores. You follow me? You didn't want somebody who had to do north and some guy on his team had to do south or east-west. You follow me? So as long as we're heading in the same directions, we may deviate slightly, but we come back. I know that's highly philosophical, but the habit part is where those three spheres of influence intersect. And that's where your habits are. And those habits, if documented properly in the form of an SOP, a company policy, but more importantly, behavior, individual and collective behavior. Those are the habits that not only differentiate you from your competitor, but those are the habits that make you money.
And to put a fine point on it, what are some of those habits that are part of your culture? Like, we always do this. Do you have some specific examples you can share?
Yeah, and I could probably not prepared to talk about all of them, but the first one's safety. There's nothing that I do or in this business or anybody does in this business worth getting somebody hurt or harmed. Okay, so safety is number one in the business for us. So we try to spend a good bit of time. I'll knock on wood, but we spend a great bit of time putting those procedures in place and ensuring that people have the proper PPE. They understand the danger that they're being exposed through a series of postings to include ASTM, notifications and documents on the materials they're handling and how to handle it, the usage of tools and equipment in particular. That's probably the biggest habit, because if you can get into a proper safety habit, that transcends into a lot of other things. First of all, it's paying attention to your surroundings. And it's about image a lot of times, It's about, I tell people a lot of times, if you just look the part, you're going to not draw fire. And if you're out there and, your significant other drops you off and you jump out with a nail apron and tennis shoes on and a cut-off T-shirt, you're probably not going to be there very long, okay? Because there's an image that comes with that. And usually there's a set of values and norms that come with that. That's at the very minute individual level. Collectively, as an organization, it's maybe on the business side about how you properly invoice and the timeliness of your invoice and the explanations of your invoicing, how you track your AP and how you track your AR, balancing it with a balance sheet so that all executives understand that they're in the business of being a businessman first, okay? This is about cash flow, and it's real easy to go out and get things done, but if you're not paying attention and doing your invoicing properly at the office level, then don't expect corporate to pick it up and make it happen. And it just doesn't happen that way. So those are just a few examples. Work performance, skills, a certain way of doing a certain thing. You've heard of people talk about a contractor that's got a brand, and his brand is not only perpetuated, but it's looked upon in a very favorable way because he does some little thing a certain way. They know that so-and-so did that because of the performance, the skill that they brought to a certain thing. So that's what I encourage all contractors to do, is find that little niche. That's something that they do really, really well, but that becomes their signature. That becomes their brand.
Yeah, I completely agree, especially about safety. I was an owner's rep and managed quite a few different general contractors, saw lots of different subcontractors. I've been a general contractor myself, and I could tell, this wasn't stereotyping, but I could tell a lot in the first 5 minutes when I walk on a job site, and I can tell a lot about a subcontractor. If they're not, this is not 100%, but if like keeping your trucks clean. When I ran a company, I decided I was going to incentivize people to keep their trucks clean. I gave out clean truck awards because if somebody would keep their truck clean, that means they were going to take care of their tools. That means things were going to be in a good place. It was a habit. And if I saw a guy with a dirty truck with spit bottles rolling out when they open the door, probably not productive. They're probably not safe. They're not detail oriented. It just says a lot. And then as far as safety goes, if I saw somebody that's safe, they're tight, they've got their harnesses, guys have safety glasses on all the time, everything's clean and ready to go. These guys are detail oriented and they're thinking, they're planning ahead, and they're probably going to be productive, probably going to be good in the field. It just says a lot. So if you're not sure where to start, then put on.
And they become stakeholders. They become stakeholders in your company, which is what you're looking for, other than just someone who receives a paycheck.
Yeah. And frankly, my opinion, my approach to safety was, listen, I'm going to spend money to keep you alive. I'm going to go out of my way. I don't want you to skip steps and work unsafely. And frankly, if you're so dumb that you're going to put yourself at risk and put the rest of your team at risk because you refuse to work safely, then we just have a real problem here and you're just not going to fit. I'm not going to discipline you if you are intentionally ignoring safety, then you just have to go. It's not a, I'm not sure what it is. It's a stupidity problem, in my opinion. So,
yeah, it is an education. Sometimes it can be an educational issue, but once you've educated them, they don't fall in line with it. I think you set a pace. We call it falling in formation and running in formation, and it's called airborne shuffle. After a while, the ones that can't keep the pace, guess what they do? They fall out and go home.
yeah.
So that usually takes care of themselves. Hey, you were talking about the trucks. My pet peeve is bathrooms. You want to find out what an organization is worth? When you go visit their location, go in the bathroom.
Yeah. Go in the bathroom. If you want to see how well a GC is taking care of their subs on a big job, go in the Porta Johns and look at their graffiti, see what they say about the superintendent. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, there are definitely some indicators. All right. So let's talk about the 4 E's. Tell me about the 4 E's and what they mean.
Yeah, I wish I could tell you that I came up with it myself. I didn't. I actually have found out since we talked last, there was a book written about the 4 E's back in the 80s or so, and I forget the author. I apologize, but it's out there. They're not the same 4 E's that I have. Mine is an outtake, but I want to give him credit. And also, there's a general officer that influenced me on the 4 E's, General Van Pelt, who was commander of the Corps of Engineers USACE for a while. He's the one who introduced me, and I have basically modified it to where they meet what I consider important, and I've expanded on it basically. The first one's energy. When I look for executives or people working in my organization, when I was in the military, particularly my subordinate commanders that worked for me running my battalions and my companies, and even the platoon leaders at that lieutenant level. I looked for traits. I looked for foundations that were in common to kind of completing the task and making the long run. The short run sprint was not what I was looking for. And I usually would look for folks that had the energy to do the job, understood excellence, not by defining it by themselves, and I'll go into these in more detail, had an edge, and then knew how to execute. On the energy side, usually there's 3 pillars that I use for determining energy. Is first, mentally. Are you mentally in the game? Goes right back to our safety. Do you understand? And I used to ask my soldiers and commanders to keep what I call situational awareness. Understand and find a balance in what's going on around you. Not so concentrated on something that you don't see the opportunities that are around you or the threat that's around you. So I used to insist upon, and it's so much easier in today's time, I used to insist upon newspapers being sent to us in the field when we were out away, or trying to get, information, letters, make sure everybody were getting letters sent out to the soldiers so that they kept a balance of being a soldier and also being a family man or a boyfriend, girlfriend, or just a family member or whatever. To stay and have a situational awareness that was built around a balance for success. The second pillar of the energy was spiritual. I think there's times that individually and collectively we have a lot of doubt. And you overcome that doubt by having something you believe in that's larger than you, that's larger than yourself. And it's a beautiful thing when you see that collectively. Mine is based in the Christianity faith that I have, and the belief that I am favored in certain ways, and that I am blessed, and that I have the strength to come through whatever it is that confronts us. And Lord knows we are all going to be confronted with challenges, both spiritually and mentally and physically at times, particularly in this business, right? And and the third one is physical. You've got to have the physical energy. And I'm not talking about, Todd, you be able to drop that microphone and run 10 miles in 20 minutes and come back to it without even breathing hard. I'm talking about I don't care if it's coffee or cocaine, but be free of substance abuse, that it doesn't control you. That you do have and take care of yourself, and proper diet and weight control, and all those things that you keep yourself physically fit so that you can accomplish the mission at hand. That's particularly important in our industry that we're in. When you talk about operators that could really have a problem if they're overweight and being able to function properly in a piece of equipment, much less endure. I live in the Southeast. We have humidity to match temperatures over 100 degrees sometimes. So you can only imagine that if you're not physically fit, that you'll break down pretty quick and work diminishes rather. Excellence is the next E, and everybody likes to define excellence in their own terms, and I find that more prevalent in this generation than anything else right now. I used to tell people that your job is to make your boss successful, because if he's successful, you're going to be successful, and the person below you is going to be successful. So, but now people like to come in and they've already got all the answers, and they know how it's supposed to unfold and how you're supposed to do things because they learned that at the university, or they learned that in the last position they were in, and I used to tell my NCOs that, okay, you deployed 4 times, but guess what? That combat patch on your shoulder has an expiration date of about 6 months. The enemy's changed. And if you don't change with it, he's going to get you. So forget about your so-called know-it-all stuff and take that patch off, put the new one on. Let's learn the skills that we need to survive. Understanding excellence. Some people will define it by money. Some people will define it by task accomplishment. Some people will define it by personal gratitude. Whatever it is, you got to find a common thread there. But the organization has to define excellence. And everybody has to buy into it as a stakeholder. And a lot of organizations like to say, well, we want to make $200 million this year. That's not all bad, as long as you lay out the terms and conditions and what that really means, okay? So defining excellence as an organization and having individuals buy into that excellence and not being counter to it, Individual may say, well, the company's doing well, but I'm only making $95,000 a year. I should be making $200,000. You follow me? Those are what I'm talking about. I'm looking for people that understand excellence, understand what it takes to win. And that's just a foundational piece of one of my 4 E's. The next one is edge. In the military, when I go back to when computers came into Vogue. Before that, it was learning how to use a map and a compass and understand. Particularly as a combat engineer, we were supposed to be terrain experts and understanding, how to navigate, how to get across country, and understand where certain things were based on that 2-dimensional print, long before GPS and all that other stuff came in. So I was looking for people that had an edge, that could read a compass better than anybody else. Later on, who could use a computer and understand all the computing better than anybody else, particularly when it came to geospatial information and using GIS and doing the things with satellites and stuff that would seem almost not real complicated now, but back then it was state of the art. And now we're moving into drones, and we're moving into unmanned aerial reconnaissance vehicle, all kind of stuff that's out there in the construction industry. Same way we're starting to use these things. So I would be looking for somebody with an edge that could help you differentiate. And I have a long expanded list of this. Todd, we can make a whole show on 4 E's. You know that, right? So, but I'm just kind of glossing over them. And the last one is execution. All of the other 3 are for naught if you don't have somebody that can execute and make it happen. And that's more of an art than anything else sometimes. And it goes back to your leadership principles and all the stuff we've talked about up to this moment.
Yeah, I agree. So if you're listening and you're thinking, I want an entire episode on the 4 E's, if you want the expanded version of the 4 E's, then send me an email, send me a message, let me know. Yeah, that's great. So to recap the 4 E's, you're looking for energy, excellence, excuse me,
With excellence.
Somebody with an edge, and then the ability to execute. One thing I want to touch on as it relates to mental and spiritual energy, you mentioned doubt. And one of the things that I see a lot is people are dealing with fear and doubt. What would you say to those people that are struggling with fear and doubt, especially right now? Here we are in May 2020, on the tail end of this coronavirus pandemic, and we're in a recession, or on the front end of a recession. What would you say to those people who are struggling with fear and doubt?
It goes right back to my first E of energy. We all have to, and some do better than others. And I look for those ones that have that energy because they're able to deal with the ambiguity and paradox of everyday living. Mm-hmm. Particularly in this construction business, or this performance business we're in, whether it's logistics or whatever, the ability to come to terms and tolerate ambiguity and paradox. And it starts with risk mitigation. Everything we do is risky. And you're not going to eliminate risk. You got to mitigate the risk. In fact, I'd submit to you, if there's no risk involved, there's probably no reward involved. Okay. It's just how you mitigate that risk. And we're going to have collective and individual doubt that can cripple you if you don't have and learn the tolerance techniques that are required to navigate the stormy waters of ambiguity and paradox that we're faced with right now. It's a different world, but you're going to have to adjust. And you got to understand and have the thought processes in place and the plans in place and the confidence in those. And I'm not talking about something you throw just to have a plan or just to have a strategy, that you've given it collective thought, you've given it individual thought. It matches your values and your personal values, and get your ego out of the way. And not be worried about so much that my company is not what it used to be. My company is not in the market it used to be. My company is not as big as it used to be. And find rewards in whatever it is that it is now, and then be able to use that as a launch pad, or you'll dissipate. I think a lot of companies, particularly with this market, it probably won't return till late third quarter. I mean, maybe late fourth quarter, I hope, is what we see, and not into 2021. A market that's certainly driven by, spending. I think government spending is going to increase rapidly here. But we're in a business where labor pools and particular skill sets are not going to be available like they were in the past. So how are you going to mitigate that? Are you just going to lay down and quit because you don't think you can? Or are you going to come up with the strategies and ask the folks surrounding you that have the same values and interests that you do, and collectively you come up with a plan and have the confidence to stay with it?
So
it's faith. It goes back to just like that religion. It's faith. It's you got to have faith because you live and have a certain values.
Yeah. So faith is belief with corresponding action. It's one thing to believe, but right. You don't really have faith. It's one thing to believe that a chair is going to hold you up, but you don't have faith until you actually sit in it and have some corresponding action. So you said that the key is you have to have the ability to tolerate ambiguity and paradox. So ambiguity, that makes perfect sense. If that's kind of a paradox in and of itself, to say ambiguity makes sense. We don't know what's going to happen everything's just, all the puzzle pieces have been thrown up in the air. But what do you mean by you have to have the ability to tolerate paradox?
Well, things appear to be something that they're not a lot of times in this business. So you have to have a strong tolerance for, um, like we just talked about, things that you think are one way, but they're really not. There's something entirely different. And that, at the individual level, you can point that out. I'm sure you've had relationships where you thought there was one thing, just to find the paradox is that there was something else. The business is the same way. You may target a market that you think is the best market, and you've got the skill sets to bring value to that market. But my gosh, it just doesn't quite work out. But you don't have the ability to see the paradox of that and move away from it into something you can. I don't know. That's just kind of one example, but that's my point about paradox, is that, and particularly in the military, I look for those leaders that had that, because if they had a tolerance for ambiguity and paradox, they usually had the flexibility mechanisms to adjust, adapt, and make work.
So they didn't just operate by a strict set of principles that said we always do this or we never do this. They had some decision-making ability. They had a framework that they followed that was a little more flexible. Does that sound about right?
You know, I used to tell my lieutenants when I was at the battalion level, I had captains commanding companies, lieutenants commanding. I used to tell the field grade officers, which field grade officers are majors and below, or captains and below. I used to say, your job is to follow the regulations and do the right thing based on the regulation. When you become an exec, a officer above the field grade, company grade, and then flag officer in particular, your job is to do the right thing, because there is no SOP or policy or any of those sort of things. So, to what you were talking about is that you gotta understand your organization at those three levels. You got to understand who your core is, those people that you trust implicitly, because a lot of organizations don't have that trust at the executive level. A construction company ought to have a guy at the lead, usually the CEO. He comes up with 100 ideas every morning on the first cup of coffee. Now, 98 of them may dissipate by the time he gets to the office, but he's always thinking about what if, okay? And then you got that guy, usually the COO or one of the executive officers, that they're the day-to-day grind guys, okay? They're the day-to-day grind guys getting it happening. So, and I'm losing my chain of thought, but where were we headed with that?
We're talking about decision-making process, having flexibility to deal with those paradoxes. Yeah.
And so you expect people at those levels, and those three levels being at the strategic level, which are normally your COO and your CFO and your CEOs and some of the senior vice presidents, at that strategic level, to come up with a plan, a strategic plan of where the company's going, so that you can set an azimuth. And that usually needs to be out at a 5-year mark, or a 1-year mark, a 5-year mark, and then out 20. You follow me? So people understand that it's a general direction that you're heading in and what the company can look like. And then at the next level is at what I call the operational level. Operational level are you guys like project, managers, some of your vice presidents, some of those guys that are running your programs and stuff. At that operational level, they've got a set of norms and policies and decisions, and the authority, by the way. The authority, so you don't become a stovepipe organization. They have authority to do certain things. And then you got your field operators, all your day labor and your skill guys and that sort of thing. That, going back to that time, distance, and space scenario with an XY axis, they are to understand where they are at any moment of time as it relates to the organization and where it's going. And that's how decisions are made collectively from up, down, right, and left to an organization.
One last question that I want to get to is, what was the biggest leadership lesson that you took away from your time in Afghanistan?
Biggest leadership lesson? Todd, it was such an honor because what I learned is that even in times we're in right now, America is a great place. It's great people. And I know this sounds like a lot of, apple pie and American flag, but it really is true. We're adaptable people. We're survivors, and we can make things happen. I saw a lot of great individuals, very dedicated individuals that became dedicated to themselves to accomplish something for Task Force Storm that, quite frankly, a lot of people said they couldn't do. And these great soldiers set a precedence and set a new way of doing things, particularly on how to fight the counterinsurgency operations that we were involved. Very dangerous. We were the hunted while we were over there. We left the wire. They came after us because they knew we had the takedown ability that even some of the infantry and some of the others in the, you may say the kinetic side of things, we were definitely kinetic. I mean, we were in a firefight almost every day. But what I learned from a leadership side is that, number one, you don't do it by yourself. You have got to surround yourself, and this transcends very easily to the construction business too. You got to surround yourself with individuals that you trust implicitly, that you know that they've got you and your best interest at heart all the time, and vice versa. You've got to take care of soldiers. I used to do what we called, and the same thing in the construction side. I used to do what I called informal contracts. We had an informal contractor. We ran a mission. We tried to make sure that everybody on that thing understood what had to happen and the ways it happened in case they were in charge because of people being taken out. But the handshake agreements were that we would cover with indirect fire within 25 miles of the departure line. That if you got hit and God forbid something happened, we'd had a medevac on site within 15 minutes. So we all had standby helicopters ready to go on any mission. And there were all these other things, that we had medics, that we had EOD for unexploded devices. We had all these provisions in place that really they were handshake agreements that people all came together at one point at a critical point in time, and they massed to make sure that we accomplished the task. And from a leadership standpoint, you had to be able to trust that people were willing to do that, and they believed in you, not necessarily you individually, but your position and what you stood for.
So informal contracts, can you expand on that a little bit? That's an interesting concept.
They're handshake agreements. I've got your back and you got mine. You can write SOPs and standard operating procedures, but if you're on a job site and you don't have the evacuation route posted and you don't have certain things done from a safety standpoint, what happens when something happens and you got a bleed out going on? Are you going to have people that understand? Are you going to do the proper training to make sure people understand what to do? And oh, by the way, they've even rehearsed it. And oh, by the way, it becomes second nature. And oh, by the way, that's my handshake that you're not going to bleed out on my job if we can help it. That's probably extreme, but I'm just telling you that those are the informal agreements that you can't necessarily put in a standard operating procedure or an employment manual somewhere. You follow me? They're those cultural things of an organization that we talked about earlier, that they knew that was Harrington's organization. They know that's DeWalt's operation because these are the certain handshake informal agreements he has with the employees that generates a certain behavior that everybody else recognizes and hopefully wants to emulate.
Yeah. And I can see where this concept of having informal contracts also comes into play when I was a project manager. There's a contract, there's a bidding phase, and then contracts are written, contracts are bought out, and then everybody that actually gets the work done shows up. And then you have to develop these relationships and develop trust, and subcontractors or trade partners need to know that they can trust you as the leader and vice versa. So you develop these informal contracts, these agreements that say, hey, I'll do this, you take care of me, I'll take care of you. And a lot of it comes back to what I hear us talking about a lot is trust.
That's trust, yeah. And that's very difficult, particularly in this business of, a lot of people like to call it the cutthroat business, talk about the bidding process. Your subcontractors got to understand you're going to price it out. You're not going to go shopping, and they're going to give you a preferred price if you have that kind of relationship with them. You follow me? If they don't, then you're going to buy it out a certain way. But if you win a project because of a price the sub gave you, I try to tell people we're not in it for the one-off. We're in it for the aggregate. So we're here for long-term relationships and standards and all those sorts of things. That's an informal agreement. Yeah.
And it also goes back to that tolerance for paradox, because at a macro level, trust is pretty low in the construction industry. And then at a micro level, trust is required to get people to work and make things happen. So, yeah. So great stuff. Well, I want to be a good steward of your time. So this is probably a good place to land, because if we go any further, then we're going to talk for another hour or so, I'm sure. So, which hopefully we'll have the opportunity to do. So, Larry, if folks want to connect with you, whether it's go to a website, social media, file a job application to find out what opportunities you might have, where should people go?
A couple of places, I got a LinkedIn, and you have that address for my LinkedIn address. I don't check that often though, but I will after this episode. And then my email is Larry.Harrington, Harrington, at trans4fed.com. And that's TRANS, the number 4, FED.com. And I do have a Facebook page, but I'm more of an observer than a participant. So,
got it. Well, this has been fantastic. So if you're listening to this and you want a deep dive on the 4 E's, or if you want us to go deeper, do a masterclass on some of these topics, then send Larry an email and say, Larry, I need more. Send him a message, send me a message, and we'll see what we can do. So Larry, this has been fantastic. Love it. I'm passionate about this stuff. I know you are as well. So I really appreciate you taking the time. I appreciate your service to our country. And then I really appreciate you taking the time to share with us today.
Todd, I appreciate it. I'm a big admirer of what you're doing. I think it's great. I think you're spot on in the approach. And I just hope people take advantage of it. Not because I'm involved, but I hope they take advantage of what you're willing to put out there and talk about, and they can come up with their own solutions and kind of deal with that ambiguity and paradox that we talked about, right?
Absolutely. Well, that means a lot coming from you, Larry. I really appreciate that. All right. As I mentioned, if you want to hear more, if you want to pull more wisdom and insight and experience about leadership and about business, or if you just want to hear more stories from Larry Harrington, then send me an email, todd@constructionleadingedge.com, and let me know what you want to hear more about. If you want to connect with Larry, make sure and go to those links. Connect with him on LinkedIn. He also left his email address as well, but get connected with Larry. He is an absolute wealth of experience. If nothing else, send him an email and thank him for being on the podcast and thank him for his service to our country. So be sure and check out those resources that I mentioned at the top of the podcast. Be sure and check out the show notes if you want links and more information. They're going to be in the notes of the podcast player. And as always, if you need help systematizing your business, if you're a construction business owner, if you want to plug profit bleeds, if you want to take your business to the next level, then I want to help you do that. And the best thing I can do for you is for us to get on the phone and talk through what your biggest roadblocks are, help you see the forest for the trees, so to speak, and eliminate some of those profit bleeds you're dealing with, some of the chaos. And if that sounds good to you, then go to constructionleadingedge.com. That's my website. And then at the top of the screen, there'll be a red button that says schedule your free call or something like that. Do that and we'll get on the calendar and we'll talk. As always, I appreciate the ratings and the reviews. If you could take a moment, leave a rating, leave a review. That helps get the word out there to the rest of the world. And if you enjoyed this podcast and you know somebody who would get some value out of it, and there's probably at least one or two people you can think of, send them an email, send them a text, tell them, hey, you need to check out this episode with Larry Harrington. Great stuff. So as always, my name is Todd DeWalt. Thank you so much for listening. I will see you next time.